Alright, so let me go over these with you guys real quick. I'm gonna Google their Jamboard is going away. Wah wah. So anyways, we're gonna have to do this this way. So remember that you've got to distribute that through the parentheses. Now one way to do this is to say 3x times, you could do a grid with this if you needed to. X cubed plus, oops, we want 2x, right? Okay. And so, but that's the same as distributing it through. In other words, I'm going to multiply this by this, and then multiply 3x by 2x. So I like using the grid. So 3x times x cubed is just 3, and remember this is like x to the first power, so that would be 3x to the fourth power, because 3 plus 1 is 4. Now I've got to multiply the 3x times the positive 2x. 3 times 2 is a positive 6. And then x to the first power times x to the first power is just x squared. So this final answer is 3x to the fourth power plus 6x squared. How many of you guys got that? Good. Now one thing that, and we've done work like this before because it's required of us, but really what we're doing is I want you to think of these, kind of think of it like this. It's really f of x, which is equal to 3x, and g of x, which is equal to x cubed plus 2x. And so really what we did is we said f of x, right, times g of x. Isn't that what we did? So just think about that for a second. Let me move my face over here somewhere. I don't know, where's a good place to put my face over there? Okay. Okay, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do operations of functions. So now let's go down here to the bottom. Now the bottom one is a little more tricky. And I'm going to scroll down so we give ourselves some room. When it comes to rational functions, it might be better to do what we call prime factorization. We've talked about this before. Make sure you write this down in your notes, because we're going to do a lot of these types of problems, and so you need to know. So that means you have to factor things. Well, x cubed can't be factored anymore, but can I factor something or pull something out of the denominator? Yeah, a lot of people shaking their head yes. Can I say x times the quantity x minus 1? In other words, I'm factoring out an x. What's x times x? X squared. What's x times negative 1? Negative x. Now the interesting thing about this is that I have 1x on the bottom here, and so I'm going to subtract 1 from here. Let me make myself a little bit of room so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. Let me rewrite this, x to the first power times x minus 1. So what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to subtract 1x on the bottom, but remember, whatever I do on the bottom I have to do to the top. So in the next line, this becomes x squared. This is actually x to the 0, which is the same as 1. And then I'm left with x minus 1, right? And so that's that final answer down there. But what I want you guys to do is think of it like h of x is equal to x cubed, and think of it as j of x. Well, let me write that underneath. We're running out of space here. Think of j of x as x squared minus x. And so what did we do in this scenario? Well, we just said h of x, right, divided by j of x. Whoops. Okay. So up top here we did multiplication. On the bottom here we did division. Are there any questions on that? All right. So now let's go through and talk about the operations. So we're going to do 3 by 5. So on the top here, we're going to focus on the operation, right? Adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And then here we're going to talk about the definition. And then over here we're going to use the example. And for our example, we're going to use f of x equals 5x and g of x equals x plus 2. It does not like all right, so let's do adding. Whoops, wrong color. We're going to add. And the notation looks a little different. We're going to say f plus g of x is one way to write it, or you could just say f of x. I'm going to have to give myself a little space here. And so that would be pretty easy. We're just going to say 5x plus x plus 2. And then what you do is you just combine like terms. This is really 1x plus 5x, so it'd be 6x plus 2. Okay. Subtraction. You could think of that as f minus g of x, which is the same as f of x minus g of x. So I would just say 5x, but now in parentheses, then I would insert x plus 2. Remember, when I distribute this -1 through the parentheses, this becomes a negative x, and when I multiply this by -1, this becomes a -2. So my final answer then would be 5x minus 1x, which is 4x, minus 2. Next, we would do multiplication. So that would be f times g of x, which is the same as f of x times g of x, which is what we did in our warm-up. So that would just be 5x, then in parentheses, times our g of x, which would be x plus 2. When you push that through, 5x times x is just 5x squared. And then 5x times positive 2 is a positive 10. Lastly, we would do division. And we would say f divided by g of x, which is the same as f of x divided by g of x. And so for this one, we would just say 5x divided by g of x. And then when you look at that one, you really can't do anything. In other words, I can't factor anything out of the bottom. I can't factor anything out of the top. So there's really no way to simplify that fraction. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Does everybody have this part written down? I went slow on purpose so you guys could write it down and kind of follow what I'm doing. Alright, so what I'd like for you guys to do is try to do this one. It's basically adding f plus x and then state the domain of that new function and then evaluate that new function at 4. In other words, you're going to plug in 4 for x. So how do we do that? Well, we have to remember that f plus g of x is a composite function, which is the same as f of x plus g of x. Now I'm going to let you in on a clue. Mr. Adams is writing a lot of stuff down. You should, when you do your homework, write it down this way. If there's anybody in this room that can do this problem in their head, it's me. I still write everything out. There's a reason for that. Okay? So what is f of x? 3 root x. What is g of x? Minus 10 root x. Now technically we're adding those. So then remember, this is like combining like terms. In other words, you can just do, if I have 3 root x's in my hand and somebody says you owe me 10 root x's, I can only give them the 3 root x's I have in my hand, but then I owe them how many root x's? -7. I owe them 7, right? And where that comes from the fact that 3 minus 10 is equal to -7. So now the next thing that we have to do is state the domain. Now what do we know about square roots? Domain is all the possible x values. And there are really only 2 restrictions on functions when it comes to domain. We can't have 0 in the denominator of a fraction, and we can't take the square root of a negative number. So to find the domain on this, I have to think, well, what does that mean x can't be negative? Well, that means that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So process that for a second. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. Can you take the square root of 0? Yeah, 0 squared is 0. So think on a number line. Right here at 0, okay? Think on a number line. Well, where are the negative numbers? Over here to the left. But can I have any value over here to the right, including 0? Yeah. Everything shaded in red is not negative. So our domain is any value greater than or equal to 0. That's the domain. Okay, cool. Next, we have to evaluate that at 4. So, remember that all of this stuff is f plus g of x. So the next thing I would say is, well, what is f plus g of 4? Well, that's -7 times the square root of 4. Wherever there's an x, I'm going to plug in the 4. Does that make sense? And technically, I should put this in parentheses. I've been skipping it for some reason. Okay. Well, what's the square root of 4, you guys? It's just 2, isn't it? So my final answer is -14. Now that's how it works if I do that by hand on in the calculator, or I mean using algebra. Let's use a calculator. So if you have the fancy calculator in front of you, if not, grab one. We're going to graph this. Okay. So how do I graph this? Well, I'm going to go to y equals, clear everything out. And here's an interesting thing. This is one way to double check your answer. Put in 3 square root of x, and then put plus -7 square root of x. And then in the next line, just put, or not -7, -10, sorry. We got to put the original, the OG functions of x. And then down here, you're just going to put -7 square root of x. And for your zoom, just hit standard. So hit the zoom button and go down to option number 6. And notice that the blue line and the red line, they go on top of each other. Let me expand this out so you can see it better. So when I hit graph, let me go back here. So this is what I want you to enter in your calculator real quick. I'll give you a second to do all that. And then you hit zoom and go to standard, which is 6. And notice that that blue line and that red line graph at the same time. So to make sure I did all my math right, what I could do is I could hit the trace button. And when I hit the trace button, if I enter in 4, when I hit enter, guess what? Y equals -14. See how that works? For both functions. Any questions? I'm going to take a screenshot of that real quick. Whoa. Okay, that's it for this one. think we'll call it good for today.